Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Down to the Wire. Joining me again this week is Camping with Candace. Candace here. Candace, this week we go down to the bayou and we go to the LeComte Stakes, which kind of kicks off the Louisiana road to the Triple Crown races. And the LeComte has come up with a full field. We're also going to discuss the Silverbulletday, which is the female equivalent to the LeComte Stakes. And they've had some good females really come up through Louisiana the last few years. And then off the track, we're going to talk a little bit about Airoforce this week, the third finalist in the Eclipse juvenile voting. We've talked about Mohe Men and Nyquist the last couple of weeks. And then you want to talk about the Bob Baffert horses. But first off, let's go right to the Silverbulletday. And I think a lot of people are anticipating this race because Stage Play kind of looms a large favorite in here.
Yeah, she definitely does. And, at this kind of stage, these races start to get interesting when you're putting these young, relatively young, they're early season 3-year-olds into route races, into big fields. And sometimes you can get chaos or get some very fast paces, which at fairgrounds in particular can be, very interesting with how these mile races are configured. Stage Play is one in here who is very well bred and has run extremely well to this point. So I can definitely see the hype around her. I'd be a little bit concerned about her drawing out wide. I think it might force her to have to be pushed a little bit more forward than maybe she would necessarily have to be otherwise. And that doesn't mean that she can't win, of course not, but it just means that they might not be able to go to whatever plan they might have had she drawn a little bit further inside. But she's not going to be any sort of a price, that's for sure. And one who I think will be a little bit bigger price, who I'm very interested in, here's Lovable Liz. She hasn't done much wrong either. Her one loss was in her first race, and she only lost by a head. Hasn't lost since then, and hasn't lost on the dirt. I really liked her last race in particular. I know she was lone speed, but I just liked the way she shaped in there. She shaped like she had improved for that step up and trip from 6 furlongs to a mile. So she's one of these who I don't expect her to be an Oaks horse down the line, but I think that this mile trip, this kind of 7 furlongs to a mile might be really ideal for her. So I'm going to pick her in this spot. I think, as much as some of these others are really well bred, there is some class in her pedigree. She's a half sibling to Bacopa Breeze, who won a stakes race over at Laurel Park. And, out of Big Brown, and she comes in here for a trainer who does well at this track and whose horses do better. They usually improve second time routing versus, that first attempt. So, she's not going to be lone speed in here, but if she can cope with the conditions of having another horse up front with her, she should be able to figure in this spot. I think, the speed in here probably is the 6 horse, but I think there's every chance that horse, let him go. Just kind of sit right there in cozy spot second, and you might get the run of the race that sort of way. So I'm going to go with the 4, Lovable Liz.
Yeah, I think the run of the race could kind of tell the tale here. On top, I'm still going with Stage Play just because I think if she would have won that last race at Churchill, which I think was more of a victim of the track surface that day and just the way you had to be running near the pace and just got beat by a good horse as well. But I think Stage Play is actually a pretty solid horse with this crop. I do like the last race by Jet Black Magic just because she improved so much from 2 races back. But as you mentioned, I think the connections on the 6, Midnight and Sony, is going to get bet a little bit. But, Brett Calhoun does well in these spots. And even though the horse looks a little bit cheaper on paper, it's got the Scarborough colors. And I think more than most could ensure at least an honest pace, and I think we're going to get a solid pace in the race.
Yeah, I think it's very possible that we're going to get a solid pace for sure. I think really, to me, perhaps Lovable Liz is the key to that pace. If they push on with it or if they pull back, then you get varying scenarios.
Yeah, I don't think Stage Play needs to be on the lead. She's forwardly placed just with her talent. So I'm going to go with her on top, but I think Lovable Liz, and there's a couple others you could make a case for in here as well. The LeComte Stakes, wow, a 15-horse field, but it looks like maybe only about 10 of them may run because there's an allowance race on Monday that a few are opting for. And then one of the horses already got hurt. Noble Thought got injured in a workout last week.
Yeah, it's an interesting race, especially with that allowance race that so many of them are cross-entered in. I do think, assuming that some of these pull out, should Tom's Ready get in, which he should, then I do think he figures in the spot. So wanted to mention that because, sometimes we don't think about the also eligibles there, and all of a sudden they get in and win. So that is one who I would say to definitely keep an eye on. Should he draw into the race, which I think is most likely. For me, I'm actually quite intrigued here by Battle Tap. He's out of a good mare, War Echo, who actually won the Silver Bullet Day. So, from a breeding line that does well down here, for Steve Asmussen, who does well here. And I think you have to just forgive that last race. It was over a sloppy track at Remington Park. It was super front-running, speed bias that day, pretty much all of which played against Battle Tap in that sort of a spot. He's a much better horse than that, and he showed it when he broke his maiden. So he's one who I think, should he get the setup in here, which it's very possible. Looks like actually there's quite a bit of speed signed on here. This is a horse who at least has shown the ability to sit off the pace, and I think he could very much be a horse who would really, potentially improve over that sort of a pace scenario, whereas a lot of times in these sorts of races early in the season, everybody wants to go to the front, and then what do? Sometimes you get meltdowns and the like, because just a lot of these horses are really untried, pulling them off the pace. So, people say, oh, let's pull this horse off, just pull him off the pace, but sometimes you can't. So this is a horse who at least I think is, capable of that from what we've seen. And like I said, just scratch that last race. That was a big mess from start to finish there. So I like Battle Tap on top. I'll give mention to Dolphus because he is that looking at lucky, half to Rachel Alexandra for Joe Sharp. I'd prefer others in here, mainly Tom's Ready, who I talked about was on the also eligible list. I'd rather have him than Dolphus coming out of that race. Actually, I'd rather have him than any of the others coming out of that race. He had a very, very troubled trip there in that allowance race leading up to here. Took all the money, went off at 6-5 for Dallas Stewart. So he's one who definitely figures in this spot. So I'm going to go Battle Tap on top, but I also would use the 15 Tom's Ready.
Yeah, that allowance race with Pinnacle Peak and Tom's Ready and Dolphus was a short field, and I don't really think it was a truly run race. I think it was a gritty effort by Pinnacle Peak, and I think the speed figure came back okay, but that's probably one of the worst trips you can get for Dolphus, off a maiden win, coming off the pace, then being forced to press the pace. Mm-hmm. And if a horse ever didn't look tired, that was definitely Dolphus that day. And I just think that's just the way the pace and the race shape dictated when you only have 5 horses in the race. Mm-hmm. Now he gets a full field.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's going to be crucial for him here. And, he's shown a lot of mental ability in addition to his physical ability that is favorable in this sort of a spot. I mean, he's drawn 5, but sometimes we see these young horses don't want to run inside. He's done that before. So he is one who I see quite a bit of speed on here, but perhaps he's the one who's going to get first run on the deep closers.
Last 2 years, this race been won by the Ramseys, and I think they have another good horse in here. Uncle Walter, another one of their $80,000 fines. And this horse, gritty maiden win, and then favored, and then came back and ran a heck of a race against Synchrony, who will be one of the top 3 choices in the Smarty Jones. But I just like the fact that was 7.5 furlongs, and I really wish they'd card more of those. I think we need more 7.5. So many of these horses get forced into these mile 70 races, their second lifetime out, and I think it's just a good prep whether the horse is good enough or not. I like that distance.
I agree. It does seem to be, kind of a very solid intermediate distance to bridge that gap between the sprints and the routes, particularly with these young horses. It seems to be, a really nice stepping stone going forward as far as building that foundation.
And then another horse in here that's going to get a lot of play that actually is my top choice. I got it down to Uncle Walter and then Destin. Destin, a full brother to Creative Cause. And I really think that this horse had a nice maiden win. And then for whatever reason, at 2-5 or whatever he was the last race, they are throwing blinkers on. He is outside. I don't know. That race was very weird. He kind of just ran evenly, and then late he kind of showed a little bit of life. I'm wondering maybe he just was idling without the blinkers, and now he'll probably show a little bit more speed, or at least he'll be a little bit more focused, if not speed.
Yeah, it definitely was a little bit weird. The run reminded me of the Baffert filly last year, the filly sprinter, who like she would run evenly in the race, and all of a sudden, the last furlong, she'd start flying, and it was like, well, where was this 400 meters ago? So it was a little bit reminiscent of that sort of a run. Like you say, he's extremely well bred. He comes in here for Todd Pletcher bullet workout over at Palm Beach Downs. So all the signs are that he's ready, and he's another one who should be, not up there with all the speed, particularly from the outside draw. You think they'll pull him back as far as they can. So I think he's one who, definitely could be another recipient of getting a favorable setup this time around.
Two more horses I think we need to mention just because of pedigree. Very famously, the Tisnows develop a little bit later, and the horse on the outside for Joe Sharp, Tis Noble, raced off the scheduled turf the last time, and I think there's some upside with this horse. I'm not sure where he fits, but I think yet he could definitely get a call at some point in this race, or at least be making a move.
Yeah, he's a half to Ocean Wave, who we both liked last year with the fillies. So definitely a lot of stamina breeding in here, I would say. So this would be a horse who maybe improve with time, and I would say all around I'd give this horse a little bit of time, not just for the added distance, but while he won last time out, I did think he looked very unprofessional still. He's still really learning what racing is all about. So he'd be one I'd give a long watch to, but maybe this is one we want a little bit further down the road.
And then I definitely want to mention Mending Fences. This is definitely, to me, a keen ice type of horse, late developer. Colonel John out of Lemon Drop Kid. Of course, Colonel John won the Travers, and Lemon Drop Kid, a known distance sire. They also, both sides of those develop a little bit later. And this horse has ran 3 good races on the turf. Do I think he's going to win this week? No, but I think he could run in the top 4, and I definitely think he'll be plodding along maybe in this series, or he maybe one all of a sudden they flip back to the Spiral Stakes and try that route as well.
Absolutely, and this is another horse who, when you're watching, have something in mind. This barn actually lately has been in poor form, so this is a local barn that usually does quite well, and they've been struggling a little bit recently. So if he can get a solid effort, turn in here a good performance, it might be a sign of how good he really is. If the barn's running cold and he also runs lights out good, well then he must be a really nice horse.
Last week, the Sham Stakes, we'll probably talk a little bit about that when we go into our off the track. First off the track, we're going to talk about Airoforce. Now, the last 2 weeks, first we talked about Nyquist and maybe him being a little bit underrated. And then last week we talked about Mohe Men. The third of the Eclipse finalists is Airoforce. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk about just because kind of where you at with this horse. I mean, huge race in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Turf. I don't even really count that as a loss. I think sometimes there are losses where you don't really lose. You just lose a head bob. And then a big win on the slop at Churchill. And I mean, he beat a horse, More Spirit, who came back to run well and win the Grade 1 Futurity. And then a couple of other nice horses in that race I think we're going to hear from down the road in Gun Runner and Annual Report. And then, of course, already Tom's Ready coming back.
He was one who, when I did my list on my blog for the 20 best upcoming 3-year-olds for this crop in the world, he was on there. I think I had him 4th, so I had Swipe and Mohamed in front of him. So I had him 3rd then. So I had Swipe and Mohamed in front of him. I definitely see the potential. The only thing that lost in the juvenile turf from him was my wallet. I loved him in that race. I liked his ability quite a bit on the turf. I was intrigued by them moving him to the dirt. When it came up sloppy, though, then it just kind of nullified the effort. I mean, I'm glad that he ran well and succeeded and did well there, but there wasn't really anything I could take from it once the track came up wet. Oftentimes, turf horses will do very, very well over, these wet surfaces, these sloppy surfaces. I mean, it still was a big field win, and that counts for something, but he has to prove it to me on a dry track. I can't sit here and say, oh, he's a definite dirt horse off of that Kentucky Jockey Club effort. And I'm actually surprised by how many people have gone that far and said that he definitely loves the dirt, because I couldn't say it off of that.
Well, what's interesting is I don't think even after 3 crops of Colonel John's and almost 600 foals, I think the jury's still out on Colonel John. I mean, is he going to be? He's got some nice horses this year, and it looks like he may actually flip the switch and could maybe, with Airoforce and a few of these other horses in this crop, maybe actually get some more mares again. But he's definitely got distance breeding, and Colonel John was one of those horses, probably one of the 4 or 5 best, just physical looking horses I've seen over the last 10 years. So I'm not really, one thing, it looks like he can get the distance because he never seems to stop running.
He doesn't seem to stop running. And, maybe what was most impressive to me, if you're going to take something from that win over at Churchill and the Kentucky Jockey Club, is that he came from so far back. I know that he does it on the turf, but that's a very different scenario. Oftentimes turf horses, the good ones, have a short but very stout turn of foot. And in a turf race that works well because usually you're going slower, you have a real group of horses. Even if you're in the back, you're, maybe 2-3 lengths from the front. This one, he was much further back. He sat in 8th and 7th throughout, made a nice, long, sustained run to get to the front here. So I would say that's what was impressive to me. He definitely, like you say, has the stamina breeding. All I need to see from him is to show it to me on a dry dirt track, and I think he's top 5 among the horses going to the Derby. But he's got to do that first.
Well, he's going to get his chance, it looks like, at Tampa. It looks like he's going to go the Tampa Bay Derby route at some point, or at least that's one of the races they're looking at. Possibly the Bluegrass. We'll have to see down the road. The other topic you wanted to go off the track with this week?
Oh, I wanted to talk about the Baffert horses. I mean, I know last week we were both very anti-collected in that we saw that pedigree-wise he'd have the ability, at least he should have the ability to run on dirt, but that it's very un-Baffert-like to start a horse on the turf 2 times and then put him on the dirt in a stakes race. He won and kind of defined what we know about Baffert, and that seems to be the case with his horses, at least from this crop, whether when they were juveniles or to now. He doesn't seem to have a star, but he has a lot of, gritty horses, but they just aren't doing what Baffert horses do. He had Taves on Ice finish 3rd twice before breaking his maiden over in the Barrett's race. More Spirit lost twice before finishing 2nd in the Jockey Club, and then he lost once and then broke his maiden. But again, losing on debut, that's really weird. And then he had Dre Fong, another horse again, who lost on debut. He badly lost on debut. I think he's about 4th or 5th in there, and then came back and won. So very un-Baffert-like. Is that a sign of maybe he doesn't have the talent that he typically has? Or is it a different type of horse? I mean, these all seem to be similar. They're pretty gritty horses. Maybe Dre Fong potentially has the most brilliance about him, but it's a weird year for Baffert, and it makes it hard for me as a handicapper to get a hold on how good his horses are and what's really going on. I mean, what do you look at it as?
Well, it was a gritty win by Collected. He raced wide, first time on the dirt.
Mm-hmm.
That track was kind of a demanding surface that day. All the final quarters and all the route races were slow, 26 seconds in that race, 26 in the Chrome race, and even though that allowance race, they came home really slow as well. So that to me usually is a sign that it's a demanding, tiring surface. So I still think there may be some upside because it was only his first dirt race. I mean, I think, sometimes I think those, when they start long on the turf, it's more a reflection of the condition book. But it was unusual that he threw him in that second turf race. So I don't know. I guess I just think, same thing with Pletcher. I think everybody thinks the common wisdom is like, oh boy, Pletcher's holding back all of his best 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds. No, he just doesn't have any good ones. And I think with Baffert, the same thing. They don't have that monster. I do think Baffert learned a lot last year with American Pharoah. I still say the best thing that happened to American Pharoah was he lost that debut race. If he would not have lost that debut race, we would have seen a totally different schedule from American Pharoah, and I'm not so sure he would have raced as long. Undefeated has that cachet, and people love that undefeated mark. They just do, and I think Baffert finally realized, who cares?
Absolutely, and I think it's going to be very interesting to see how his horses do. It seems like he has 4 now, I guess, who are really quite in that stakes mix over in the Southern California circuit. You think usually maybe one will go to Oaklawn, a couple will go down to Sunland. So it'll be interesting to see how many, make it all the way through. I'm not sure how far the fourth collected probably wants to go far enough, and Dreyfong, but I'm not sure how far Taves on Ice or more Spirit want to go. But it's going to be interesting because all I know is watching this from afar, I've been very perplexed at what's going on over there. And yet they're all still winning somehow. So it'll be interesting to see how long this goes on.
Well, if you start looking at the speed figures, collectively, they look slower as a group than last year's group.
Yes.
But that doesn't bother me. I mean, to me, it's about, are the races any good? And as a bettor, can you make any money on them? I really don't care what the final time is. So that doesn't bother me. I think we're seeing less brilliance. But overall, I think there's more better horses than last year. I mean, I firmly believe that. I think there's 20 good horses. They're just all semi-slow, whereas last year you had 2 or 3 that really just stuck out right away. And then it never changed. I mean,
yeah, that was
Frosted
the problem.
And American Pharoah and whatever, like it never changed. And I'd rather have a field of 20 that can maybe change a little bit and get away from this slew of 3 to 5s that we saw last year in all the preps.
Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what I want. We got our Triple Crown winner last year. That was really cool. Okay, let's get back to the competitive racing, because that last year, that's what was rough. I mean, if you're at all betting these races, we talked about it so many times, but every region, whether it's California or Florida or the Midwest or New York, they were all extremely formful. Like, you couldn't make money betting those prep races. So that's the one thing I really hope, is that this year is a little bit different. Collected didn't get us started off in the right direction, but, I hope maybe this will be the week to change it.
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, I think the LeComte has a chance for a non-favorite to win. So far we're really 3 for 3 in favorites. Collected,
Yes.
Awesome Speed, and Flexibility, and that's and all of them are going to be wherever they go. I mean, Flexibility will definitely be favored in this next race. Maybe not Awesome Speed or Collected, but I think we're starting to see that pattern again. Now, hopefully, remember last year we thought the most competitive racing and the 3 biggest fields were in Louisiana, and the Ramsey horse swept all 3.
Yes, he did.
International Star, and he's running this Saturday as well, so he's back on his home track.
Yeah, they brought him back from, didn't he come back at Zia Park? He's back home now. Bring International Star home.
So, yeah, I do think that, at least with the Fairgrounds race this week, you get 10, 11 horses. I think the favorite will be 3 to 1, 7 to 2. But, I think that's a 4-horse scrum, who's favored and who's not favored. And I do think that we necessarily won't see a favorite. And I do think there's a couple of long shots like, Z Royal and Tis Noble and Mending Fences that can, spice up that superfecta a little bit. So I think that race is going to be that. And then, next week we continue along, and then just 2 weeks away now from the Holy Bulls. So quick thought on Chrome's race last week before we sign off here.
For me, I thought he ran well. I mean, he did everything that I would have expected, and we talked on here, and I said he should win that race. I mean, he wasn't going up against anything of, note, and knowing he was going to go to Dubai to be prepping for the Dubai World Cup, you had to figure he was going to be pretty close to fully cranked, because they were going to ship him out there to Dubai to lose, so you're not going to be that far off here. Thought he ran really well. I thought at the end of the race he looked like he needed the race a little bit, which is normal coming off of that long of a layoff. But he did everything you could have hoped for him. I think a lot of people are playing into his speed figure and this and that, and I don't care. They went so slow early on in there that there's no way any buyer figure is going to come back fast. They went really, really slow. I think it was a 49-second half. So, I mean, there's not a lot to take from it, but he did what he was supposed to do. First, check on the box, and move on to the next race.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Down to the Wire. We'll join you again next week right here on Down